All right, so this is Abstract Particulars, part 6 of Truth and Truth Making. We are going through a collection of essays in E.J. Lowe's uh, anthology, Truth and Truth Making, and another anthology and other random papers we think of. And maybe even a YouTube video, which I will mention briefly shortly.
All right.
Yeah, but mainly it's trying to figure out truth makers. And today we read Paul Horwich's what's the title of it? Being and Truth. Very, very interesting paper. Okay, so my thoughts. What are my thoughts? Actually, I think I'd like to go last this time because I'm still trying to figure out what I think. I'm very uneasy about this paper. So let's break the routine and go in another order. Ken, you want to go first?
Yeah, I enjoyed the paper. It was short and sweet, I guess. Like it was. It raised a lot of. Well, it's very different from a lot of the papers we've read previously in that it raises a whole bunch of other considerations and questions and problems for truthmaker theories, at least of the kind that have been given in some of our other readings, that I hadn't really thought of before, but feel intuitively like there's something there to me. This business about really distinguishing between a theory of truth and a theory of truth makers, and what truth makers, what really is the role, the proper relationship of a theory of truth makers to a theory of truth, was something that this paper added complexity to. And I really liked the whole business about constitutive explanation at the end. I was like, oh my gosh, this is, I don't know, does anybody know when this was written? I was like, wow, because in more recent years, people have talked and written a lot about that.
I think this is in the current debate section of the anthology, and there's a citation from like 2000 somewhere, I think. So it's somewhat recent.
Yeah, well, it's reading this paper, I can just see how the debate about grounding and constitutive explanation and stuff must have gotten going, because this paper seems very much in that vein. And I don't know, I don't have too many comments about it. I thought it was, I have some questions about like the Russell and Frege thing later on, but I think I mostly agreed with it. But what it really raises the a hard issue about the nature of truth and explaining what truth is and how what it means to give a substantive account of truth. He shows how there may be still some sort of space for a truth maker theory in a sense while maintaining deflationism, which is fascinating. It's not something I had really been able to intuit as a possibility before reading this. And yeah, so I thought that was its value.
Josh, are you a deflationist now?
I found this to be a very compelling paper. I would say, so in our other group, we're reading Truth and Predication, Davidson, and I've been picking up some new insights by seeing Davidson sort of wrestle with predication. And I've had some other ideas on propositions and truth before entering into this track. And this paper is kind of a culmination of like a lot of concerns that I've had. And I
Oh,
found
no, no,
it
no, 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 no. I was
compelling.
joking. I don't want you to be a deflationist.
No, no, no. So here's the thing. What's so compelling about it is exactly how he sort of maintains the possibility of a truth maker theory with a deflationist account of truth. And what I've been kind of picking up from Davidson is that I think there is a very deep conflation of linguistics with metaphysics in the form of semantics. And I think it may be that there needs to be a clear separation. And so some of the analyses of these atomic sentences, at least there, and I think modality is going to be trickier, and some of these other sentence types will be trickier. But certainly with the atomic sentences, it seems like there's something to this deflationist account that doesn't absolutely undermine a truth maker theory, but it does seem to reduce the necessity of it while still satisfying some intuitive sense that we're talking about something. So there's something here, but here's my one complaint, my one major complaint since we've been reading Davidson in this other group. I read the Third Dogma of Empiricism like 2 years ago, and so I kind of like reviewed it, and I'm wondering if that Horowitz is falling victim to that third dogma, this idea of explanation as somehow bridging this gap between the world and these propositions. It seems very much like the third dogma that Davidson had in mind. And if that's the case, I think there is probably a mistake here, but a mistake that isn't, it might not be a dead end. It might be something where if there is an account of a way of bridging this proximal distal gap, which I really see as introducing the origin of the possibility of truth, is that you have to break away from causation as just necessary connection to something like a meaningful taking or representing a distal source, which introduces the possibility of error, which introduces the necessity of talking about truth. So it might be that a deflationary account of truth and linguistics is great, but that there's still going to be some account of how you bridge this proximal distal representation gap, as Sellers was wanting to get at. And if you solve that, if you focus there, it might be that truth is on the right side of that. So truth isn't in the world, it's on the right side of the given gap, right? So if you let go of the myth of the given, you realize there has to be some connection between the world and then these sort of like determinate propositional contents. You bridge that gap and the truth is going to be on the right-hand side, in which case a deflationary account of truth as presented by Horowitz here, or this kind of modified version, it's very compelling. Because he's not saying it's the complete story, and that's why I think it's compelling. It opens up the door to something else. But I am concerned about this third dogma. I think it seems like a mistake in the paper, but I'm not sure. It would be nice to review.
Well, that's fascinating. As a side note, Kenny, when you put together your Sellers syllabus, can you make sure that we address whatever it is that Josh just mentioned there? Because I think that's likely to be very important. Do you have some sense of what that was about?
The what was it? The proximal distal?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure, but I can find out.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. But I think
Yeah,
I'm having
I wrote
a
it down.
difficult.
So.
Okay, good. I have a difficult time with Sellers because on the one hand, I think he should be one of the heroes because he's a hero to my heroes, but I haven't been able to place exactly what role he's supposed to do for me other than snap me out of internalism.
Well, no, the problem is he's a hero to my heroes, but also my villains. He's
exactly.
hero.
No, exactly. It's that's part of the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think he necessarily has to be because he tried to be such a synthetic figure. Because he tried really hard to incorporate the insights of Carnap and J.L. Austin and Kant and the pragmatists and everybody. He didn't refuse anyone.
Karen, what's your take?
Yeah, I wasn't that thrilled with this paper. So.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Okay,
but yeah, I didn't really get a chance to reread it today. But I remember. I think he's right that we're not going to be able to use the concept of necessitation to account for the relationship between truth makers and the propositions that they make true. But I think his suggestion that we use explanation is a non-starter. And it's a very specific type of explanation, and meaning it's the explanation of how something makes something true. Right. So basically, it's just going to be the theory that we build. Right. So it's not. So he gives the example of, how do you explain that Mars is red, and then you might look to physics about color and everything. No, how do you explain Mars is red is true? You look and say, oh, look, no, it's red. You don't have to, it's not like, what explains the fact that Mars is red is a true sentence is just the redness of Mars. You don't have to explain how Mars came to be red. That just seems to be taking you off on a crazy, down the wrong trail. But I think he did make me realize that the thing that is wrong with using necessitation, right? So the idea that I said the existence of X necessitates the truth of some proposition referring to X or describing X in some way, is that I think is also what I find really dissatisfying about all deflationary accounts of truth. And that is that every one that I've heard explained uses a truth functional connective. And I don't think you get to use that in your theory of truth. You got to explain that, right? So if you use the phrase if and only if, there's only way to understand how if and only if works is if you understand that the relationship between the truth of the two sides. So truth is built into if and only if. So your theory of deflation, if you just sort of say, well, snow is white is true if and only if snow is white, it depends on truth already. It's not a theory of truth, right? It's dependent on truth, right? Because you have to then ask, okay, well, is snow white? How do we decide whether we assign T to that part? And then you have a question about, well, is snow is white true? And it takes you right back to the question you started with, right? Because you just make it half of a biconditional, but to see if the biconditional holds, you have to be able to see the relationship between the truth values of each side. So you're going to have to face the question of, is snow is white true? So that you can hold it up against snow is white, the sentence snow is white is true, right? So you just delay the question, but you haven't answered it. And it's just, and I think the same thing with these necessitation relationships, which is why we had that big fight about, well, it has to be the proposition X exists, that's the truth maker, because that's the only thing that can entail or necessitate anything. If the idea of necessitation is too truth functional, we can't help ourselves to it to explain truth, right? It's dependent on that. Truth functional notions take truth as a primitive, right? So, if necessitation is something like true in all possible worlds, then we can't use it to explain true, right? So I've found, I think maybe he's right that truth is most useful as a tool for making certain kinds of generalizations. But I think that's what a theory of truth does, right? And that's why truth maker theory breaks things down into chunks. Like we want to talk about the truth of simple claims. We want to talk about the truth of what it means to say counterfactuals are true. All these different types of truths that we want to look at. We're generalizing. We're looking at a bunch of statements saying they're counterfactuals and needing a theory to account for them. I found his account deeply dissatisfying.
Okay, I'm really glad I heard from all of you. So my feeling, first of all, is to be very wary of the deflationism, especially after having been reading Davidson, and well, to confess, having gone through a deflationist period myself, and yet I think that his objections are so clean and so well put together that they very nearly put together a program of tasks to be accomplished for a truth-making theory that would satisfy me. So I have deep respect for what's going on here, and I think every couple of pages set out what I think is important about a truth-maker theory and what is to be done to achieve it. Even though that wasn't his purpose. His purpose was quite the opposite, mainly to show that it's not necessary, it doesn't add anything, even if it were accomplished, and that it's not clear that it can happen at all. So I think we'd have to go through the particulars to see how that's the message that I came away with. Before we get into it, I do want to mention the YouTube that I have in mind. I saw a 2-hour conversation on YouTube between Timothy Williamson and Paul Horwich, as a response, basically a long commentary by Williamson on a recent book by Horwich called The Metaphilosophy of Wittgenstein, and it just sparked so many thoughts in me, which I would very much like to hear all of you respond to as well in conversation. It wouldn't really be about truth makers, but it would definitely touch upon very many of the things that we've talked about over the past year.
I'm gonna have to watch this video.
yeah. I mean, I'll send it to you right away. And additionally, I think, well, let's just say that it's great metaphilosophy. It asks the question, what is it that philosophers are doing? Where Horwich asks, was Wittgenstein right to have an anti-theoretical therapeutic approach? And Williamson asks, hey, well, what's wrong with what I've been doing all along? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And it's pretty stark and intense how they disagree. And yet, of course, it's very academic and enjoyable. By the way, Kenny, I think you saw the beginning of it. It's where he stammers a lot. It's impossible to listen to be honest. But once you get past that, it's a lot of fun.
It's all
Oh yes, the video where Williamson stammers. Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that one, yeah, I'm
Really
sorry. Well, but I think it's the one that you and I commented on, the stammering in particular. So
Okay.
yeah. Okay.
Is it the possibility of Wittgenstein's metaphilosophy?
Yeah, it's in Dublin and it's very well lit.
Oh yeah, UCD. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
cool.
So maybe we can do a video on that. Maybe not though.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. So if you can pass that link on to Karen, that'd be great. Okay, so being in truth. We did just recently read Davidson on what's wrong with deflationists, and it's helpful to have reviewed that. Karen, you didn't with us anyway, but basically what he says is deflationists maybe got too excited about Tarski, and that's not really what Tarski meant. He just said that at least this much is true, but there's more, there's got to be more. And then he goes on to say what he thinks must be said in addition about truth. And among the things he considers are correspondence, which he puts down for a variety of reasons. And this is ultimately going deeper on correspondence in ways that would answer Davidson's objections. And so this summation in section 2, I think, is a fantastic presentation of everything that we've seen so far, even in representation of the positions that he's opposing, which I think is something to be appreciated. So do we want to go through that, the 6 questions and the 6 answers?
Sure.
Okay. Let's do them pairwise, question and answer at a time. So the first one, so what is it that's made true? Propositions. Of course, that might be abstract, or it might be concrete, like utterances or believings, etc. Stop me if you want to comment on any of these, but well, actually, unless you have something on that, I have something on the second one. The second one is, well, what are the truth make? What are the things that that make anything else true? And these would be states of affairs, events, tropes, facts, physical objects, abstract objects, something. This can be a thing. Main thing being only that it exists. My only thought was to add that it could be any entity, not just objects. So we have to be inclusive of universals and laws too. And that comes up later in the paper. Or at least I would like to be inclusive of that. And third question, what's the relationship exactly, right, between the truth bearers and the truth makers? And he gives 3 ways of spelling out X makes Y true. There's X necessitates the truth of Y. X exists and it is necessary that X exists. If X exists, then Y is true. And the last one, X's existence entails that Y is true. These aren't obviously distinct, but there's nuance in each one of them. Any comment
I
on
wasn't,
those?
yeah, I wasn't sure, because we're not really sure what arrow means there.
Fair.
Given that Armstrong introduced his special cross-categorical entailment relationship that he used arrow for. So I wasn't sure, since his primary target is Armstrong, if we're supposed to read that as Armstrong's arrow, or just straightforward if then.
I think it's a straightforward one because the antecedent has exists in there. So you have prepositions on both sides.
Right. So there's no one that kind of captures Armstrong's position in that list of three.
Yeah, fair enough. That one's missing. Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because he says in a footnote that it's Armstrong's, theory of truth makers that he's kind of using as like the foundation for this.
Well,
But
I
maybe
mean,
it's
isn't
the earlier theory where Armstrong wasn't clear that he wasn't giving us the second option.
I'm not sure. Isn't Armstrong's view that the makes true just is a necessitation?
That's what I was wondering. That's why I put Armstrong's view question mark with the first one. Is it? But what? Yeah, was it necessitation that he settled on? He just had this sort of it's a special kind of entailment, right?
Yeah, I thought it was cross-categorical necessitation, right?
Yeah. So.
But in a footnote in the paper, it says that later on, Armstrong would realize that was too weak of a claim because it allows for symmetrical dependence, which is going to be a problem.
Right.
So I don't think we've read wherever he changes his mind on that.
Right, and
Sure.
well, and also because of the insistence on the purity of the contingency of both parts and all those other things. Right,
Well, X necessitates the truth of Y could be cross-categorial. I mean, if X is, say, an object and Y is a proposition,
right, but if it
then
it could be,
that it would be. So I
yes,
feel like it covers Armstrong's view in that sense.
well, I guess it depends on
Yeah.
how you understand necessitation, right?
Right.
If you think necessitation is a kind of possible world truth functional notion,
Well,
or something like that, or
I don't think it matters. I think because every one of these theorists will have to weigh in on exactly how they
Right.
interpret that necessity. So this is just covering all of them.
Yeah, I think that's why he wrote the word necessitates,
rather than
to be as neutral as possible. But I think that one can read that one as a line which Armstrong would affirm.
okay.
And the fourth one is what makes true a simple contingent claim, such as Mars is red? And what about the other ones? Disjunctions, negations, counterfactuals, and so on. And so the answer he gives for this one is basically just the stuff we've been talking about, at least for the disjunctions and generals and the atomic ones. The tricky ones are the negatives, the counterfactuals, and yeah, he only mentions the negatives, but basically the point is that there are easy ones and difficult ones. And then question 5, does every truth have at least one truth maker? So what were the two axioms spelled out elsewhere? It's maximalism and necessitation.
Necessitarianism.
Yeah,
Wait, was it truth maker necessitarianism?
Necessitarianism, yeah.
That's it. Necessitarianism.
Something like that?
That one,
Yeah.
that one in maximalism. I think question 5 is it about that? Maybe not. No, maybe this is the optional one. No.
Yeah, this-
5 is
minimal.
maximalism. 5 is maximalism.
Yeah.
Does every
5 is
truth have at least
maximalism.
have one truth maker? And
Yeah.
the answer he gives is,
Okay.
I think, yes. Yes, I think everybody we've read affirms maximalism,
Mm.
except for the business where Lewis says, "Well, what if you try to do without it?" And then 6 is, what is it to be a minimal truth maker? And the answer he gives is either X makes Y true and no part of X makes Y true, so the mereological one, and then a formalization of that. X makes Y true, and there is no Z such that Z is a part of Y, X, and Z makes Y true. All right, so I love this because that does seem to agree with all of the positive views we've read. It does seem to capture what we want from a truth maker theory. It doesn't capture why we want it, but he talks about that elsewhere. And it doesn't say too much about the difficult cases, but of course it shouldn't, since that's not what all the theorists have in common. That's just the problem that they all face. Right? So then what's next? The nature of truth. He first begins with, what does he do here? He's basically reviewing the motivation for saying that there is something that makes truths true, but intermixed with his deflationist conception of truth. And this is where I begin to have difficulties with Horwich. In particular, the second paragraph of 188, where he appeals to the ordinary language, in saying that the ordinary person has mastery of the concept, but does not require to deploy a theory of that kind, he says, which would have the morass of principles. In other words, ways of handling all the different kinds of propositions, which would require a special handling from a theory of truth making.
So this hit me in the eyes. This one was just like instantly, I was like, oh man, this is my complaint against Lewis. This is my argument against modal realism. It's like the subtle changing of topic. Like it seems that our account of truth ought to capture our intuition of truth. And so I thought this was a very impactful meta philosophical point, that if we sort of bring in this heavy philosophical machinery to solve these problems and we're left with something seemingly technical and different from where we started, have we really solved the problem? I think that's a deep philosophical question itself.
Immediately after that, he says, first we must grasp what truth is, and only then can we go on to say which entities are needed to make true all the various kinds of propositions there are. He says, this is a liberating thought, for once we see a truth maker theory not as aiming to articulate a concept of truth, but as already presupposing one, we are free to invoke the most plausible account of that concept that we can find, and to interpret any proposed truth maker theory accordingly. And the most plausible account of truth is deflationary. It is the idea that there is nothing more to the concept of our taking, quote, P unquote, as true, to be equivalent to P. By the way, why does he use ankle brackets for quotation? Am I missing something here? Or is it
every paper we've read, they've adopted that as.
Oh, they have?
It seems to be an Australian thing, or I don't know what it is. I'm not. Yeah, but it's specifically for propositions, right? When you use proposition letters, I guess.
Okay, so maybe it's like quotation, but for the abstract objects, not the sentences.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then he says, an important merit of this idea, besides its theoretical economy, is its capacity to fully explain how we deploy our concept of truth. I have to apologize, but I had only a snarky response to all of this. He begins with, his mastery of the concept does not require him to deploy a theory of that kind. And I thought, well, or maybe it does. And few are masters of the concept of truth. After all, that's what the philosophy of truth is. It is to become a master of the concept of truth, not to acknowledge that everybody is already a master.
I think, yeah. And I would agree that that there's a sort of call to investigate our basic intuitions, but I also think that the different things he gives on the at the shopping list at the top of the page about the kinds of different types of propositions that truth makers address, I think that the average person could cover all the different stories that they give with the idea of correspondence. It's just correspondence to different weirder things, right? And so if we need to capture an intuition, I don't think deflationism is the intuition of the common people when it comes to truth at all, or the most plausible candidate. People usually just hear it and get angry. They don't say, "Oh,
That's a good
that's
point.
that's what I mean," right? They mean correspondence, but then you ask, okay, well, what makes it true that Batman could beat Superman in a fight if it lasted long enough, right? And they're like, well, I don't know what makes it true, but something does, or they'll start to tell you about the properties of Batman and the properties of Super. Like they know that they have to talk about things, that the truth is out there and it corresponds to something, but they might not know to what. But yeah, I don't think that.
I agree completely. I love the sort of stricture he lays out, and then immediately he's like, obviously the most plausible is deflationism. I was like, no, it's not.
No, it's correspondence, and therefore all these different subcategories could be correspondence to different types of things, like abstract objects. That's a new twist, rather than stuff in the world. Or it's some sort of like there is the sort of the modern relativist intuition that something like coherence, where you can say things like with a straight face, like people have their own truths, and those two people, the coherence and the correspondence people, will bat heads, but the deflationist will be the rare bird who just says it's just us reasserting or something,
So,
like I
think
don't
what
know.
I think what he meant here, and because I think the way that I read this kind of played out, is that if you start with your intuition about truth and then start to analyze truth maker theories, you'll find that it falls flat. And what you're left with is a deflationary account of truth. I think that's what he means. It's not that if you start there, you instantly grasp deflationism as obviously correct. And if he does, that's a huge blunder, because there's no way that's the case. But I did find myself disagreeing with him on this point. And as I was reading his arguments, I thought, oh, yeah, I guess it does kind of naturally, from an intuitive conception of truth, lead to this linguistic deflationist account of truth as he's laying it out. I think that's what he meant. Otherwise, that's a huge blunder, because there's no way.
No, I don't think he was talking about what people intuitively think may be said about truth, but rather that you might say, the psycholinguist trying to understand what it is that people know in virtue of knowing how to use the word would settle on something like a deflationary account.
No, he says an ordinary person. He's very specific.
I know, but I think it's talking about something analogous to knowledge of grammar, which it takes a PhD linguist to tell you what it is, even though you know it. Because he does talk about the mastery of the concept. Mastery of the concept does not imply your ability to write a book on truth, much less an essay or a paragraph. It just means that whenever anyone uses truth in your vicinity, you know exactly what's expected of you and what you can do in return. I just don't think that that's true. I think that's true for many cases, for anything that amounts to little more than intersubjective consensus building. But for anything more than that, the fact that people, actual ordinary conversations are actually very good evidence that we don't have common currency on what truth is about. That's why you get these arguments about whether you can speak about personal truths, because we don't really have a common mastery of what's going on here. I mean, like the deflationism seems to be, and this is actually what motivated me to bring up the meta philosophy. I don't know what to call it, discussion on YouTube, because it's motivated by his Wittgensteinian anti-theoretical stance to even propose such a thing, to sell short the philosopher's offer of coming up with a more substantive theory of truth, by undermining even the desire to produce one, by trying to make the case that there's nothing to be found. I just don't see any. I see there's plenty of evidence to the contrary in actual, ordinary, non-philosophical conversations about truth.
I'm not sure that's quite fair, because he goes on to say that the truth maker theory isn't a theory of truth. And so that's going to be a target itself. So I don't think he's giving up this idea of there being truth.
Well, no, but he is saying that the account is deflationary.
That's right. But he's saying that's not a theory of truth, though.
Yeah, but that's part of what I disagree
the
about. I think
deflationary
it is
account
part
of
of
truth
the
is a theory of truth for him.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fair. But
Yeah,
I guess I think the target of like a truth maker theory being a theory of truth, I think he argues quite well that that's not actually truth. It's what makes a truth, right? But it's not the truth. It's not truth as such.
Yeah.
So that's
Well,
kind of the target here.
no, but again, like I I think a theory of truth has as part of as a chapter of such a theory, the truth making relation, just as a theory about stars also talks about how stars are formed. So I reject the idea that truth maker theory is somehow to the side of theories of truth. It's just a refinement of the project, of the larger project of the theory of truth.
So
I
this
mean,
is so I suppose there's a question for Horwich here, which is like, he seems to be arguing that truth maker theories aren't really about truth. They're just about, truth makers, which shouldn't be surprising in some sense, because that's what they are theories of, right?
Right.
But I suppose the question that's remaining is, well, maybe it isn't truth maker theory, but truth making theory that is the relevant one for the theory of truth.
Exactly. I mean, we're not really interested
in
in
the
truth
sense
makers
that
as
there's still this
such.
relation, right? There's
Yeah.
still this it's the relation,
Right.
the necessitation, or the in virtue of, or the what he means to replace in a deflationistically spirited mood with explanation.
Right.
That's good. Truth making. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and because it is relational, you're concerned with both of the relata. So, and to the extent that a theory captures the
right.
necessary truths of a kind, then these are among the necessary truths about truth, or rather about
Because
truth.
it's the truth making relation, which is the bridge that he will replace
Right.
with explanation.
Right.
So one of the relatas isn't truth, unless you think one of the relatas is truths, because it's the propositions that are true.
That's what I meant. I
Right.
meant truths.
Yeah.
Yes.
So here we have like truth making. We have truth makers, truth making, and truths. And it seems to me, but in talking about all of those, neither one of them is truth itself. But in understanding all three of them, you understand truth.
That's the
But
idea.
even with
Mhm.
truth making, it's not that relation that's true. It's the property of the proposition or whatever it is that is true, right? So it is the relata that's true, not the relation itself. So even still, it
What?
seems
What are you saying?
the truth making
so-
relation is not the truth. It's the proposition made true, right?
Oh, these
It's
are just
whatever-
two different levels. It's just two different levels. The truths that we want a theory for are all of them, right? It's a theory for all
Yeah.
the truths. But additionally,
Right.
of the theory that you have about truth making, you want it to be true.
I mean, presumably the ultimate end of any of these types of theories has to be to elucidate a statement to the effect of truth makers make truths true.
Right.
Right.
That has all of the essential ingredients there.
Mhm.
Yeah. So,
Right.
so for the reasons we've just outlined, it's difficult to really accept lying down that truth making theory is irrelevant to a theory of truth. And that would only be said by somebody who is committed to deflationism and feels that there's a bit of an incursion in doing this metaphysics, which gives us a great segue into section 4, metaphysical knowledge. So here he's examining, well, what exactly is this necessitation relation between truth makers and truth bearers or truths? He just he walks us through what we've heard before. Says nice things about Greg Restall, which I appreciated because I like him too. Although I've never heard of him. This is all I know. But I just, like, if all he ever does
Whoa.
is the
You
real
read it?
talent.
Read his paper.
No, no. I meant
that
I meant
was
the
great.
paper. No, I meant all I know is that
okay.
paper.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, what?
No, all I'm saying is if all he ever does is come up with that real entailment idea,
Right.
that's
He's like the Gettier of truth making.
Yeah, exactly. That's better than Gettier, because rather than just complaining, you're producing, So anyway, but okay, so what is Horwich saying here? He's saying, well, what exactly is this necessitation? It seems overly naked. There needs to be something more to it. And also, is it symmetric or asymmetric? He's raising interesting questions. Now, I know that he's motivated by the deflationist program. And I can see how this contributes to that, especially to the extent that he epistemicizes this necessity relation to one of explanation, replacing the necessity with because. but I read it differently. I read this as an invitation to, and I hope you love this, Josh. I read this as an invitation to advance truth-making theory to a causal account of truths.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Why not? You know, it's still metaphysical, by the way. I mean, provided you accept a straightforward relation between causation and explanation, you get both.
Yeah, except that the complaints against necessitation, if that's the truth maker relationship, would apply to causation as necessitation. So it might actually kind of move where the work is at, right? Causation can't then just be necessitation because there is an asymmetry in causation, famously, right? So you still need to modify necessitation in the way that Armstrong did for truth making, but just for causation, if causation is going to be right.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Well, let's hold off on that until the next section. But with respect to just the options here, I wanted to go back to your introductory comments, which I thought were really interesting. In particular, your observation that I forgot how you put it, but my attempt to reconstruct it here is that what is wanted in an account of truth, and for that matter, predication, to relate this to the Davidson book, is something that keeps the semantics on one side and keeps the reality on the other cleanly, you know, so that you're not importing across that divide, muddling your theory or your account.
Yeah.
And I think that this is exactly one of those locations where we have to be careful to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So then with respect to the asymmetry, I'm not sure. Okay, now going back, well, actually, before we go to that, let's just see what this next section is about, because I think it is where he lays out the difficulty with asymmetry. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you want to deal with the asymmetry issue before we go to his 3 objections.
Or the 3 objections.
I don't remember because I don't understand them. All I know is that the first one is where he relates the truth making biconditional to causal explanation, and the second objection is, yeah, I don't know. I read this twice and I didn't understand it, and I thought it might be.
Or are we in section 5, 3 objections? Is that where you went to?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see. So you went through it 4 already. Okay.
The infinite thing was cute.
Yeah, I don't know. This section was very difficult for me, and I don't know what it is that I'm missing, other than that I do want to talk about the asymmetry issue, and that's it. I want to hear what all of you think. Other than that, I can only think to read it slowly again and see what we think of. Can we begin maybe by Josh telling me what do you mean by the asymmetry of explanation, and why is that a problem?
This comes up on the bottom of 190, right? Is that where this starts?
Right. So this is in section 4. That's why I was wondering why you jumped to 5. In 4, the asymmetry comes up. I think this is related to the symmetry of necessitation, right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting confused because there's a footnote where he kind of outlines the rest of the paper and it takes a while to get to it. So I kind of remember jumping ahead.
Oh, I don't remember what footnote that is.
Well, so the truth maker relation is necessary, and that's symmetric because it goes both ways. But if he replaces it with explanatory relation of because, then it only goes one way.
Right. So the real problem is that if you have something like Mars being read, making the proposition that Mars is read true, and necessitation is that relationship, then the proposition that Mars is read also just makes Mars being read, makes Mars read. And obviously that doesn't work. That's not our intuition about truth. And of course, that's not what we want from a technical concept of truth either. So it seems that, just this necessitation relationship isn't going to work.
I don't understand that, because can't he just choose the direction? Can't you just choose whether it is that the truth maker explains the truth of the truth bearer, or the other way around? The former seems the obvious candidate. I don't know why we would ever consider the other.
So I don't know the history here. I was hoping this is where Kenny would regale us with some amazing story. But the footnote says that this is the nature of necessitation. Armstrong realized this and that he was allowing too much, and then later revised it with, necessitation star, just like,
Which footnote is this?
uh,
Let's go there.
notes are start on 198.
Is it?
It looks like 10, yes. Armstrong has come to appreciate that the familiar notion of necessitation is too weak for his purposes. As mentioned above, note 2, reliance on that notion yields obviously incorrect results. So he proposes to invoke restricted notions of necessitation and entailment for which by definition those difficulties and others do not arise. And then he says, but of course this is simply to acknowledge the problem. It does not constitute even the beginnings of a solution to it. That was a little snarky.
Isn't this just where Armstrong admits that the slingshot arguments can be a problem and he wants to focus on contingent propositions? Isn't the star just a way of saying, just let me work with the contingent ones and I'll deal with the necessary ones later?
No, because the necessary truths will entail all other necessary truths.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But the contingent truths won't. But even with contingent truths, the necessitation being symmetrical means that the propositions will still entail or necessitate whatever the proposition's about. So that's still the problem here, even with contingent truths. So Mars being red might be contingent. It makes the proposition that Mars is red true. But now, since necessitation is symmetrical, the proposition makes Mars red because it's symmetrical.
I don't understand. Yeah, I'm not understanding. To analyze X makes Y true as the existence of X sorry. To analyze X makes Y true as X exists, sorry, one more time. To analyze it as necessarily X exists if and only if Y is true, removes the asymmetry in the analysis, or rather replaces the asymmetry in the analysis with having the left-hand side be about existence and the right-hand side being about.
I thought if and only if is a
truth.
biconditional. So the truth on both sides are contingent or conditional on the other side, so it's symmetrical.
Well, I mean, the content is not symmetrical, but the logical constants are, because the biconditionals
Well,
is
the
symmetric and the
it's a
necessity.
biconditional truth function. So whatever goes in the left comes out the right true. Whatever goes in the right comes out the left true. It's a biconditional truth function, right?
In that sense, yes, but the left-hand side is about existence and the right-hand side is about truth. So you might say the right-hand side is a truth about a truth and the left-hand side is just a truth about an existence. And so there's an asymmetry there, and that's what represents the asymmetry of the unanalyzed expression of truth-making relations as one thing making another true. So there's no making relation in the opposite direction, even given a necessitation analysis.
So I had never thought of it, and I love that because I always thought causation was necessitation. But he says this is a natural intuition, and then a biconditional really is a biconditional. It
No,
goes
I'm not
both
denying-
ways. So
I'm not denying that.
I don't know.
it's-
I'm ignorant of the history here. That's why I was hoping someone would tell me exactly what was going on.
Well, there's two things going on. First of all, I'm not denying that it's symmetric truth functionally.
Yeah.
I just think that there's an asymmetry in the content, first of all. And second, if we analyze necessity as causation, which he's kind of suggesting, although not unwittingly, because I'm reading the paper constructively, even though he's trying to tear things down. If you analyze the necessitation truth-making relation as causation, then yeah, causation is asymmetric, and you have to say what causes what. But it's obvious here what that would be, or at least obvious to me, that the truth makers are causing the truths for the same reason that a causal theory of reference would have the referent be the cause and the referring expression be the effect. So I don't understand what the issue is here, unless I've misrepresented what he's talking about.
Apparently Armstrong understood and changed his position in response. So.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that's correct. But I'm not sure that what he understood has anything to do with what either Horwich or we are talking about. What I remember when I read Armstrong, and when he added the asterisk, was that he was concerned not with issues of causation or explanation, or with questions of symmetry, but rather with issues of necessity and contingency, posing problems for the individuation of truth makers, for
Yeah.
the truth bearers. And
Yeah.
unless those are all related, I'm not
No,
seeing.
different problem.
Yeah. So, or he might be referencing a paper we didn't read. I mean, I don't know. I didn't follow up on what 2004 10 to 12 is.
Yeah, exactly.
As for a constitutive explanation,
Well, I mean, isn't Horwich? I mean, here he's talking about I mean, allegedly the problems are the counterintuitive consequences he lists at the end of 190.
Yeah.
That he seems to think that if you go with a necessity, an account with necessitation, you get weird counterintuitive consequences like these ones that he lists, right?
Let's read that.
So he says, because of this defect, the original account of quote unquote making has various counterintuitive consequences. It entails, for example, that Mars is made red by the fact that Mars is red. The state of affairs of Mars is red, well, the proposition Mars is red being true makes it true that Mars is red, and Mars is made to exist by Mars.
Right. So
yeah.
So the first and the third seem to me, I have a hard time understanding the first and the third, because the truth-making relation is not symmetric. X makes Y true does not entail that Y makes X true. So why would we say, and also, I'm not sure, before we go there, what does he mean by the fact that Mars is red? Later, he talks about what facts might be, suggesting that maybe we're talking about Russellian propositions. But up to this point, has he talked about facts yet?
Yeah, facts have come up in some
he says
of the
weird things about them, like maybe they don't have parts, or
facts have come up
as
in several
Well,
listings of propositions.
It's the initial target for the foundational truth-making theory, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's the initial problem.
I think it's just in answer A2, where he says that among the candidates for truth-making entities are facts. Okay, so
Right.
On that reading of facts, then I don't understand how facts would make anything true, because the how anything would make facts, how anything would make a fact. Oh no, hold on a second. Yeah, okay. Mars is made red by the fact that Mars is red. The fact that Mars is red, if we take that to be a truth maker, would make it true that Mars is red, but it wouldn't make Mars red. Those are not the same thing. For a deflationist,
that's his point, though.
No, well, yeah, for a deflationist, it would be the same thing.
No, not even for a deflationist. No. His point is that the intuitive conception of this truth-making relationship is asymmetrical. But when you use this symmetrical biconditional, these are the strange counterintuitive effects you get. Nobody wants these. These aren't like desirable outcomes.
Yeah, what I'm not understanding is, so of course, yes, I understand that if you interpret it symmetrically, you get these oddities. But why is he interpreting it symmetrically exactly?
Wait, why does, I'm just not sure what symmetry has to do with these examples.
Because there's an inversion. Mars is not made red by anything other than the evolution of the solar system. But truth-making theory is not about making Mars anything. It's about making truths true.
How are we supposed to get Mars is made red from?
That's what I'm not understanding, and I think it has something to do with this issue.
Because he's already being a deflationist at this point, right?
Right.
So he's just saying, so you can go from Mars is red is true if and only if Mars is red, And then you can say, well, what's the truth maker for Mars is red is true? It'll be the fact that Mars is red. So the fact that Mars is red if and only if the Mars is red is true if and only if the fact that Mars is red exists. And then you can go from that to Mars is red makes the fact that Mars is red exist. Or if
Yeah,
and
but-
only if the fact.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I guess I would have to analyze this more technically, but I feel like all of this makes sense only if you accept that that truth attribution is synonymous with the disquotation, which is of course what the deflationist wants us to accept. Maybe not the synonymy relation, but that anything that can be said of the one can be said of the other. And I don't think that's the case. I certainly agree that if Mars is red, then it is true that Mars is red, and vice versa. But it doesn't follow that what makes Mars's red true makes Mars anything.
Right, but if you're a deflationist and anytime you see Mars as red is true, you can just take that out and just put Mars as red in, right? So then you say something like the state of Mars being red makes Mars as red true, and you just take that out and put in Mars as red because you can, because you're going to deflationist. You'd say the state of Mars being red makes Mars being red, and that sounds weird.
It is weird, but that's because deflationary theories of truth are weird. And if anything,
Well, I
Exactly.
mean, I
deflationism.
mean, but the issue there isn't with deflation, but with Tarski, right? I mean,
No, because
No,
Tarski
if we
I mean, he
accept
says-
if we accept
No.
those sentences,
no, I don't think
No,
so.
he defines it as are taking P as true to be equivalent to P. That's how he defines his
right? But
deflationary as.
yeah,
So
but I
you can
mean,
take one out and put one in. I'm not sure what equivalent means. They don't mean the same thing, right? One is about a proposition, the other is about P.
Well, they're
Yes, I
truth
assume what
functionally
he-
equivalent. They're truth functionally equivalent, but that's
Well,
not the
except-
same.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah, I have
irrelevant
Right.
because when we ask what makes a sentence true, we're not asking whether it is true. If we were asking whether it is true, then we could do the truth functional equivalence, use truth functional equivalence for substitution. But if we are asking what makes it true, Tarski doesn't give us anything to substitute for that.
but I guess all that means is that. So, I had some intuitions along sort of the same line when reading this paper, which is just that it's not actually clear that the predicate the predicate's like is made F or because or in virtue of allow the same kind of substitution that would be provided for you by the T sentences, because they might be more intentional contexts or something like that. That is, they might be sensitive in a way, sensitive to substitution in a way
It's just a different property.
that is not obvious.
I think it's just a different property. One thing is whether or not something is true. Another thing is to ask what makes it true. It's just two different questions. And well, anyway,
Well, I mean, those seem very related questions. I think a very different question is why it's true, or what explains the truth of it. I do think that's different from what makes it true. So if someone asks, is it true that Mars is red? You can just say, yeah, look. And they'll say, oh, is that Mars? Yeah, it is reddish. They're so right, look through a telescope or something, right?
right.
But if you ask, why is it true that Mars is red? Then you have to do the science he tells us you have to do to get the explanation of why it's true. But if
Yes.
you're just trying to answer, is it true, right? Then you're looking for the maker, like, you just have to gesture to the maker, the state of the world that of its redness, right? And that seems like that's either a very specific kind of explanation or not really an explanation at all. It's just a where to look to answer the question, is it true?
Right. Can we look at, maybe, can we go to the bottom of 191 and begin where he says 3 interrelated considerations? I think if we can understand from there to the middle of the next page, then I'll have a, this is where I had to read several times, and I have an interpretation, but I don't think it's what Horowitz wants me to be saying, how he wants me to be interpreting this. He says 3 interrelated considerations lead to that potentially devastating conclusion, namely that
Never possible for the fact that P to make true the proposition that P.
yeah, that P. Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the first place, according to our ordinary and scientific practice of explanation giving, if we want to explain, for example, why it is that Mars is red is true, we first deduce that Mars is red from some combination of laws of physics and initial conditions. So we establish that Mars is red because of laws and initial conditions. And then invoking the biconditional, Mars is red is true if and only if Mars is red, we go on to deduce that Mars is red is true, and hence to explain why it is true. Consequently, Mars is red is true because Mars is red, and in general, P is true because P. Moreover, and for exactly parallel reasons, the schematic relation between P and the fact that P will be there exists such a thing as the fact that P because P rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I think
I don't understand
just-
that. I mean,
I
I
don't
get the last sentence I didn't understand.
yeah, I don't see why laws of physics and initial conditions come into it. I just don't see it.
Oh, I can explain that. Like so
That's
I think
the fun.
I mean,
yeah,
that's
that's
that
the fun
shows
part.
that
That's
shows
where we get necessitation from causation.
Exactly.
well, that's yeah, but if we're I don't think, I think that's because we're asking a different question than the truth makers are
I agree. But
asking.
yes, but it's a question we ought to ask in this context. Because what is it that makes Mars red? I mean, granted,
Right.
whatever it is that makes it true that Mars is red is the truth-making question. But let's set that aside for a moment and ask, what is it that makes Mars red? What makes Mars red is these laws and these initial conditions, right? So then, having established that, can we relate that to what makes Mars is red is true? And he seems to think that there's a problem here, but I seem to think that there's a solution here. It seems to me that what makes Mars is red is what makes Mars is red is true.
That's his point.
Yeah, but that's not a problem. That's a solution. Like,
Well, I mean, he's offering it as a
for,
solution, and I think it's rubbish because I think it changes the subject. Like if I say, okay, what makes it true that there's a bear on the mat is Boris on his mat, right? What does it matter why Boris is there? Who cares?
because if the making true relation, which we all acknowledge is a necessary relation,
Mhm.
derives its necessity from its being a causal relation, then causes,
No,
or,
well,
you know,
how can-
it could be constitutive as well as causal, by the way. Yeah.
how can I don't know. Causal seems really a weird thing to say. Is it covered by some sort of Boris the wooden bear on a mat causal law between this and
Well, that's
a
why I added
proposition?
constitutive. That's why I added constitutive.
I mean, why? I mean, maybe Boris just wanted a bit of a sit down. Maybe Boris is just a tool of my example making. It just seems irrelevant to the point that there's something's on the mat is made true by this. the explanation of why it's a bear, why it's a mat, who cares, is irrelevant to what makes it true that there's a bear, there's something on the mat.
Yeah, I feel that, but I think that it can be made relevant when we go deeper into the nature of predication. But for this particular case, the example of the bear being on the mat, it might be better to fall back on constitutive explanation rather than causal explanation. But then that should satisfy your intuitions, because
I mean, it just means so if I ask, is it true that there's something on the mat? You just look and say, yes, it's true that something's on the mat. You don't need any backstory. You don't need anything else. You might naturally say, well, why does she keep putting that bear on that mat? I mean, other things will come up, but if you're just asking, is it true that there's something on the mat? And I say, yeah, the bear is on the mat. And you're like, that's true? Yeah, it's true. You just look. You don't need to know the backstory. You don't need to know how he
Yeah.
got there. You don't need anything like that.
yes.
So
Yes,
if,
non-philosophers have mastery of the words, but that's just not the question we're
well,
asking.
but here's a question. So here's the thing is, we're trying to, he's saying, you want to explain the relationship between some state of affairs of Mars being red and the truth of the sentence Mars is red, right? And he wants to say it's one of explanation. But I think if that's the case, it's not the kind of explanation that has anything that really needs to bother with reflectance properties or anything like that. It just, if Mars is red, that explains it. Mars has the property that makes the sentence Mars is red true.
Yeah,
Well-
yeah, I'm not suggesting you need to say more if all you're interested is the most immediate answer. And for a general theory of truth making, the most immediate answers are the most appropriate answers. But the thing is that constitutive explanation and causal explanation comes in layers. The explainers themselves demand explanation, and it's interesting to relate one set of explanations to a you might say subordinate set of explanations, if only because it tells us something about the nature of the necessity of the truth-making relation. But what I still don't understand why he thinks that, for exactly parallel reasons, the schematic relation between P and the fact that P well, just what follows from there. He says, there exists such a thing as the fact that P because P. Yeah, I don't.
What
P
he's
does
what
not
he's
explain anything because it isn't a cause or anything that constitutes anything else. If he said because of that P, then it's even worse.
well, no, but he does say because P.
But not because of that P, right? So how
I'm
could
not sure
anything-
what you're distinguishing there.
Right. Okay. So let's just spell it out. So earlier he says Mars is red is true because Mars is red.
Right.
He's saying that for parallel reasons, we should also conclude that Mars is red because Mars is red is true.
No,
Oh, okay.
he's
No.
not.
Yeah.
Thank God then, because that's what I thought he was saying.
No.
Because
No,
notice
no.
that
He says you go from
well, hold
says
on
you
one
go
second.
from Gloss in the initial
One second. Notice that Mars is red is the fact. So in the first one, Mars is red is true because Mars
Yes.
is red. So on the left, you have the truth predicated over proposition, right? The truth bearer, and on the right would have to be the fact, if this is to be a analysis of the truth-making relation, right? And facts are to be the truth makers.
Well, only if
And-
you think facts are propositions, because it's
Sure.
P, it's the
Well,
proposition.
Well, hold on a second.
I mean,
Facts
he later,
are
he later. thinks
later, but
propositions are wrong.
earlier in question and answer 2, he lists facts among
Okay,
the candidate
'cause-
truth makers.
Right, but what he's doing here is he's saying that we start out with some proposition, Mars is red, and we explain it by saying, well, here's what we know about the laws and the initial conditions that make Mars red. And so we're explaining that proposition. And then we can go from the proposition to the claim Mars is red is true. So we get in general, P is true because P, right? Because of the proposition. And therefore we get, because of P, there exists such a thing as the fact that P. So our assertion of P, we get to first by our talk of all the laws and stuff like that.
That's right.
And then after the fact,
You lost me
explain that
already
it is-
when you
it
say
is
because
P
P.
that makes it the case that there is a
Yeah.
fact that P.
Right. See, I'm lost because it makes sense when we're talking about truth making to talk about the two sides in distinct ways. So we can talk about propositions being among the truth bearers, and we can talk about facts being among the truth makers. But when we just say P, it's unclear whether we're talking about the truth makers or the truth bearers.
No, it is clear because only the truth bearers are in the brackets. That's it. P is just
Yes,
state
but P is not
bearers.
in brackets here.
No, but the P in brackets is on the left, and P without brackets on the right is just the world as it is. Whatever the world is, whatever the proposition is about, is on the right.
I agree with that. So in this, so where he says brackets P is true because P, that one is clear to me. The left is the proposition, on the
Yeah.
right is the fact, right?
That's just a generalization of the previous one, right? Mars and red is the proposition.
No, but then what about
Right.
that there exists such a thing as the fact that P because P. So you're saying that there exists such a thing as the fact that P because the fact that P?
That's why I
is
don't get
red.
it.
No, Mars is red.
Okay, what
The
what
fact-
Horwich is saying in this section is that there are two parallel lines of deductions.
Yes.
Mhm.
They both start with the laws and the initial conditions. From that, you derive some particular P, and then from that, you apply the relevant biconditional to get the proposition that P is true, or there exists such a thing as the fact that P. So there are just two different
Right. He says
deductive lines.
exactly parallel reasons.
So I
Yeah.
don't see those parallel.
The arguments are laws and initial conditions, P as premises, and then you get the proposition that P is true as the conclusion. That's one of them. And then the other deduction is laws and initial conditions. Actually, I mean, I guess I'm sorry, I'm not really saying this correctly. It's two. I should have drawn this. It's two deductive lines. From laws and initial conditions, you derive P, and then from P and the relevant biconditional, you derive the other thing. So there's two of them, and in one of them you're deriving the quotation, that quote P is true, and then in the other one you're deriving there exists such a thing as a fact that P.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, I think you got it right, Kenny.
Yeah,
So,
I
but
think-
in both,
I wrote it on. I wrote it on my
but in both cases,
tablet,
in
but
both cases, P the proposition is the middle step, right?
yeah.
Laws and initial conditions to Mars is red, and from there to it is true that Mars is red, or laws and initial conditions to Mars is red to it is true that there is a fact that Mars is red.
There is a fact that Mars is red.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
And
So-
where's
So the
the
fact is, yeah.
where is the additional premise that says P, therefore there is a fact that P?
So in the paragraph after that, so he says, This is on 192.
Well, but hold on a second. Hold on a
after-
second.
yeah,
Shouldn't it be
I'll
in the
read- I'll
previous?
re- I'll-
Shouldn't it be in
He
what's
just-
previous to
he just-
this?
He just writes it in a postfixed kind of
Okay, all right,
way.
fine.
yeah which makes and it's a little bit annoying reading because then you have to read like ahead to reason backwards, but yeah. So he says, for we explain why the fact that P exists, not by deducing it directly from the laws and initial conditions, but by first deducing that P, thereby explaining why it is that P, and then by invoking the biconditional, the fact that P exists if and only if P, to deduce the corresponding fact exists. Deduce that the corresponding fact exists. He says, thus, the fact that P exists is always less fundamental in our explanatory deductive hierarchy than P is.
Oh, I see. Okay, no, I understand.
Yeah.
This is why I had a problem with it earlier, because the fact that P exists just are the laws and initial conditions. So it's not less fundamental. It's what he starts with.
Mm.
No, that doesn't work. I think for the reason that Karen's unsatisfied. All you've explained is what makes Mars red, not what makes the proposition true that Mars is red. It's just a different explanation. It's just unrelated, right? But I agree in a sort of reconstruction of this, where you then move it forward and say it's the way the world is with some sort of Hempelian, cover law story that then makes the proposition true or something. But that's not what he's proposing here, and I think that's a mistake.
Okay, no, fair enough. But okay, I still think there's a sleight of hand here, or it feels that way at any rate. Forgive me if I'm just being
No, I think that
dense,
is a
but-
sleight of hand. I think that's why Karen's unsatisfied. Is you don't get from explaining how the bear got on the mat to how the bear being on the mat makes it true.
No, I don't mean my sleight of hand. I mean in Horwich. But
No, that is
forgive me for
his
being-
sleight of hand.
He's
Yeah, I
not
think
saying
it
what I'm
slightly
saying. Is,
changes. He uses the ease with which we hear the question, why is it true that Mars is red, as a request for an explanation of the redness of Mars, right?
Mhm.
Whereas when we're talking about the truth maker relationship, what we're looking for is what we look to answer the question, is it true that Mars is red, right? So if I say, is it true that there's something on the mat, right? I just have to look and I see, oh, it's not a bear anymore, it's a platypus. But yes, it is true that there's something on the mat. You don't have to know my reasons for switching the bear and the platypus, or how the platypus came to be there, right? It's just,
right.
this is what makes it true that there's something on the mat.
Yeah, but
and
okay, so let's do this.
Why is there something on the mat is because I wanted to make an example, but that's
Yeah,
not relevant to what we look to answer, is it true that something's on the mat?
Yeah, I get your point, and you're right. But I'm still not seeing what the hierarchy is. Can we number them? So at the bottom most level of this hierarchy are the laws and initial conditions, right? And then immediately above it is Mars is red, right? And then immediately above that is what?
Well, it could be one of two things. It could be either Mars is red is true,
Mhm.
or it could be
The fact that Mars is red
The fact that Mars is red.
the fact that Mars is red exists.
exists. Yeah, exists, right?
Okay, so there seem to be four things being said here. There's laws and initial conditions, let that be one. Two, Mars is red, let that be two. Three, there exists a fact that Mars is red. There exists a fact that Mars is red. Is that the way to put it?
Mhm.
Let that be three. And then fourth is Mars is red is true, right?
Mhm.
And this is the order of the hierarchy on his view.
Yeah, of the hierarchy of explanation. But notice what you can't then do or what doesn't seem it's going to be promising to do is say that the fact that Mars exists explains that Mars exists is true. I mean, sorry, the fact that this fact that Mars is red exists explains that Mars is red is true, because they're both results from this other tree this explanatory tree that doesn't, that where they're the endpoints, not the start. So
Mhm.
how is one going to explain the other? And in fact,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it strikes me that there are too many levels on this storied building, and that the laws and initial conditions are just giving us the fact. In other words, level 2 is ought to be just be the fact, and then that explains that Mars is red is true. I don't see 4 levels here, even though I see 4 bits of language. So I maybe yeah, maybe I'm lost in the technicalities, but I don't feel the force of this argument. I'd have to spell it out in writing.
Well, it's the fact that P, right? It's not P, it's the fact that P. The fact is,
Yeah,
the
that's
fact
what I
comes
said.
after P, right?
No, I don't think it does. I don't think it does. I just don't.
Well, there must be something that exists before there can be a fact that it exists.
No,
right?
no. The fact that P is what exists. It is Mars and the redness of Mars, or just to the redness of Mars.
Isn't that just an interpretation of fact as something more like state of affairs? Because I thought
Well,
the whole
again,
time it's fact as like this entity above and beyond whatever makes the
sure,
fact
but
right?
sure, but that's the
yeah, I'm not
problem.
really sure what facts are. I mean,
That's
on
the
his view
problem.
anyway.
Like I'm not imposing anything on fact here other than that it played the truth maker relation, and as such, I'm saying of it everything I would say of all the other truth making candidates, such as tropes or states of affairs. So I take Mars and its redness to be the fact. Of course, if you take fact to be the name for prepositions or Russellian propositions as opposed to Frege propositions, or yet some other entity that has nothing to do with a simple truth-making account, then you're just introducing complications resulting from mixed match of theories. It's not due to it doesn't fall out from the bare bones truth maker theory as he lays it out in his question and answer pairs. Remember, he gives facts as a candidate among others. And so if this argument is to apply to any of these theories, it ought to be here a kind of variable for whatever the truth maker happens to be. In fact, I would have preferred that instead of saying fact, he just said truth maker. And if we have that, then notice that the laws and the initial conditions that make Mars red are what make the truth maker. It's what it's what explains the existence of the truth maker. What explains the existence of the redness of Mars? The laws and the initial conditions.
I think Kenny's talking, but it's muted.
Oh,
Sorry about that. There's a lot of detail that's sort of papered over here. You know, for instance, I mean, you know, like if you're depending on your view of the nature of things, everything follows from the laws and the initial conditions, right? There isn't anything that doesn't follow from them.
yeah,
So,
but I wasn't speaking generally of all the laws and all the conditions. He enumerates the very specific laws and specific conditions that give us the redness of Mars.
yeah, sure, but presumably it's not going to be some sort of law of Mars that's tailor-made to only its redness and nothing else in the universe. My point is simply that there are many truths that follow from a statement of law and the initial conditions, a whole host of them, right?
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, Horwich seems to bring up that first you deduce that P, and then you deduce these things about truths or about facts. I suppose at least the one about truths is somewhat certainly plausible on the face of it, given that presumably the laws and initial conditions you're appealing to are not laws of language or laws of truth or meaning or anything like that. They're laws of, physics, right? So that makes sense that you would need to deduce P first and then combine it with that biconditional. But
course you
but
deduce
it's a
P
harder
first.
question in the second
Yeah.
case with the fact,
Well,
because
sometimes you don't
it's
have to
not
deduce P.
it's
Can't you
not
just
clear that,
observe P?
well, they're sure, but I mean, observing it might not be an explanation, although I suppose that's another question, right?
Right,
Deduction
that's
is
why I
not
think it's just
explanation
not about
either.
explanation.
Well, he's saying that it's obviously he's, going off of some kind of, deductive, law model of explanation. I mean, he just says it.
Right, yeah.
So
I
Yes,
did,
but
yeah.
if you
but
don't agree with that, then obviously that's its own issue.
but Kenny,
Yeah, I
the-
don't think the relationship between truth makers and the propositions that they make true is one of explanation. Or if it is, it's a very specific kind of explanation. It
Well, he thinks
what
it is.
explains that the answer to is it true is yes.
I mean, well, then we're just not evaluating his theory. I mean, that's what he thinks it is.
Right, but this is an indication of why it's wrong, because it makes you think about things like laws and initial conditions, which aren't relevant.
Oh yeah, like I think I can concede your point that they're not
Right.
relevant, but that's just because the truth-making relation is the relation between the second and third story of this hierarchy, and the scientific or nomological explanation of the redness of Mars is the relation between the first
Right.
and second story,
Because
which is not about truth making, but about astronomy.
but we have to remember that the whole point of this section is to
No,
argue that
I get it.
the whole point is that truth maker theory is doomed.
Yeah.
So this
I get
isn't
that.
his truth maker theory, right? This is what he's saying truth maker theory really is, and it's doomed.
Right. No, I get it.
Right. Yeah.
I get it.
And so
No,
I'm
he's
saying
saying,
that's not what truth making theory really does. It doesn't talk to us about explanations for P.
well,
Right.
that's
I
no,
mean,
you're right about both points, but that you can you're right about both points, but it may well yet be that that a truth maker theory relates to explanation in a very interesting way, because if one thing makes another, then it has explanatory value, right? And that doesn't
Mhm.
mean that it has anything to do with the explanatory value of theories of planets, because that's about explaining the redness of Mars. The question is, what does the redness of Mars explain, not how do we explain the redness of Mars? If the redness of Mars explains why Mars is red is true, then we have a truth-making theory, at least for that one proposition. And we still haven't explained the redness of Mars. Now,
Mhm.
his observation that it is doomed has to do with the nature of his hierarchy, and an additional
That's right.
step in here due to the way he treats facts, which seems to be at odds with how I'm understanding facts, at least in their capacity as truth makers. But
That's right.
not because interpreting the necessitation of truth, of the truth-making relation, fails as explanation, only because what he concludes from that observation falls somewhere else.
Mhm.
I'm
Right.
very suspicious of all this fact stuff because of what he later says about facts being like propositions.
Yeah,
Hey,
no, I
Brad,
agree with that.
Can we just be fair to Horowitz though, that this part of the paper, all he says is, it's kind of silly, right? Because he's kind of answering the question very literally. What makes Mars red? And the answer is going to be something like oxidation. But that's not his answer to truth making. He just establishes that Mars is red. That's the first step. He just establishes that Mars is red. And then he says, and then invoking the biconditional. And then he has this biconditional truth making relation, right? The proposition Mars is red is true because is made true by whatever it is, Mars being red. So he's not saying that it's this sort of deductive cover law that is the truth-making relate. He's not proposing that here. That's not what's going on here at all. He's just establishing that Mars is red, period. The problem, as Rodrigo was just saying, it comes down to this sort of this facts being after the establishment of the proposition, right? So it can't be that the fact is making the proposition true, because it comes after. It's less fundamental, so it can't work, right? That's the argument. That's all that's being said here.
Right. So the question is just whether the laws and initial conditions really do make the proposition true before its truth makes the fact exist, or whether the laws and the initial conditions make the fact exist first, which then in turn make the proposition true. And I'm not sure why the first is more attractive than the second.
Right. Right.
I
But
think it might just be because of the confusion of how to understand the role of deduction in constitutive and causal explanation. We go back and forth between the two for very much the same reason that we go between truth makers and truth. You know, when we talk about what can be deduced from what else, we're talking about how to relate propositions in virtue of you know, truth preserving inference. When we talk about what causes what and what constitutes what, we're talking about truth makers. So the word because here is just painfully ambiguous, because we use the word because in talking about deduction, and we also talk about it, and we also use the word in talking about causal relations. So when he says Mars is red because, well, no, Mars is red. Mars is red is not an event. Okay. So either you're talking about the proposition, in which case because isn't a relation here. Maybe its truth is, because its truth might be an event of a kind, right? But if we're going to talk about Mars being, Mars being red because, then we're talking about the fact. We're talking about the truth maker, not about the proposition. It's just he's just being in my judgment, which is not reliable because I can't say I understand every sentence in these 2 pages. But in my judgment, he's going back and forth between using language that is proper for truths and language that is proper for truth makers.
I thought this is where Kenny would jump in, because I know, Kenny, you've talked a lot about grounding, but it seems that what he has in mind, because he says explicitly, he's not talking about causal explanation, but constitutive explanation.
Yeah, everything I've said applies to constitutive.
No, of course. But what it sounds like he has in mind is something like having this natural account of Mars being red, or how it is, what makes Mars red, sort of grounds, it's sort of oh my God, I can never say this. Epistemicizes truth? Epistemicizes truth, right. So the claim that Mars is red, we're justified in saying that that is true because it's grounded in this causal explanation that we're using. Right. So it's not about the truth-making relation at all. It's just sort of like grounding the claim that Mars is red. And we're saying that to say that it is true is to say that we're sort of justified in saying that it's red or something like that. Right? Is that the general idea here? I think what he's going for?
That's what it feels like.
But he never says that explicitly. He just, I guess it's strongly implicit when he says it's constitutive explanation. And then he uses the idea of grounding instead of sort of determining or causing.
Let's ask Kenny. Oh, shit.
Kenny ditched us.
I think he stepped away because he needs to go check on some reference materials. I'm sure that his answer is very appropriately correct. So maybe we can go a little further ahead and revisit when he comes back.
Yeah.
There's a highlight where I wrote the comment, what is going on here? So maybe you can answer that. That's at the top of 193. He says, okay.
90.
As we have just seen, our explanatory practice is to deduce propositions such as Mars is red from initial conditions and laws of nature, thereby explaining why, for example, Mars is red, and then to deploy the schema there exists an X such that X is the fact that P, if and only if P, to deduce and explain why the corresponding fact exists, right? So yeah, this vindicates the intuition that I believe most of us have, namely that it is not because of the fact that Mars is red that Mars is red. On the contrary, it is because Mars is red that such a fact exists. Thus, the particular metaphysical claims that truth-maker theory uses the notion of truth to generalize are even less plausible than the truth theoretical formulations of them. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure it does vindicate his intuition. And it may even be true that most of us have it. I have no idea, but my intuition is the exact opposite. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this.
Yeah, I think it just shows me that my intuitions are not deflationary because I think
Yeah,
I,
that makes
I
sense.
might agree that it's not because of the fact that Mars is red that Mars is red, but it is because of the fact that Mars is red that Mars is red is true.
Which I take to be the same thing.
So I don't think he is presupposing deflationism here. I think he's presupposing his conclusion that facts are true propositions. I think that's the problem here.
Yeah,
'Cause he
I
keeps
think,
saying-
yeah. That's
Because he
it.
keeps saying the fact that P, and I'm like, okay, of course you're using it exactly as you'd use a proposition, and then showing us
Right.
how it couldn't be identical with whatever the fact is or the state of affairs is or whatever. It's like, yeah, that's the problem. It's not presupposing deflationism. It's presupposing facts as true propositions.
No, but I think Karen might be right in that deflationism was what motivates what you've just outlined.
Maybe, but I did find the argument that facts are true propositions compelling, and it does seem to fit the history of the rejection of facts as the truth making.
It does, but that's because the history is about of being very confused about these things.
Of course. Sure.
How about the
Yeah.
third nail in the coffin of the thing that isn't dead? He says, oh, okay, well, here we go. This is the issue, right? A third potential nail in the coffin of truthmaker theory lies in the merits of supposing that what we mean by the word fact is simply true proposition. For if that's so, then it obviously can never be that blah, blah, blah. Yeah, everything we've been saying. Okay, but then what reason? Okay, this is the part where I really thought, okay, he's definitely just not with the program. And there's got to be deep historical reasons for this, probably having to do with the Russellian progression. So we'll get to that. But first, he says, what reason is there for identifying facts with true propositions? I think there are 4 good reasons to do so. First, the objects of belief are propositions. But we can say it is a known fact that Mars is red, and yet not everyone believes it. I thought, this is why we talk about truth makers, because the word fact is ambiguous. This is not
Right.
evidence of anything other than that we've been confused, and we ought to be less confused.
First point's
Second,
dumb.
Yeah. The second, the fact that Mars is red and the proposition that Mars is red have exactly the same structure as one another and involve exactly the same constituents. Yeah, but that's because the way you're referencing the fact is by way of the proposition. The structure of both sides is the structure of the proposition. And the only difference between them is that the singular term picks out different things. In the one case, like what you're doing is the structure here is really the structure of a sentence, right? That Mars is red is a sentence. It's literally 4 words, right? Concatenated. And then when you prefix that with not prefix, what's the word? Whatever, pre-concatenate. With the proposition, right? Then you're referencing you're denoting the abstraction from amid that abstracts what's common to all of these sentences. So of course it's kind of the same structure of the sentences. But the other one picks out the fact. That's not going to have any structure necessarily that it denotes, or at least if it does, it needs to be demonstrated. But it appears to have the same structure here only because of the description by which it is being denoted.
But that's by the same reasoning we have for reasoning about the structure of propositions, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the difficult, or that's...
Well, propositions, yes, of course, but that's because they are abstractions from sentences. But the more difficult one is to say whether that is the reason why we think, did we lose somebody? Oh no, oh, where's Karen? Yeah, that is why we worry about whether truth makers have the same structure, of course, but it's just not obvious that it's exactly the same structure. And in fact, I would expect them to have the same structure only if there were a one-to-one correspondence between truths and truth makers, and that'll, so given that there is. Sorry to keep going. Third, among
No, but I
possible
think
states-
hold on, but I think that's part of the problem is I think it's this isomorphic structure that then leads to an almost one-to-one relationship between facts and propositions, right? You can't have a fact of a different structure make true a proposition of that different structure. Like,
Yes, you can.
it,
Yes, you can.
it
I'll give you an
needs to be
example.
unstructured or it needs to be something different. No?
No, I'll give you an example. Snow is white or grass is red. Okay, so that has a disjunctive structure, the proposition. But the truth maker does not have a disjunctive structure. It's just the whiteness of snow.
Isn't that a property, not a fact?
It's a trope, and what facts are is what the issue is, right? But I'm denying, because I think these reasons are poor, that facts as truth makers are just true propositions. So if we accept that for a disjunction, the truth maker may be just whatever makes one of the disjuncts true, then the truth maker of true disjunction need not have a disjunctive structure if only one of the two disjuncts is true.
Right, but the disjunct still has two propositions, right? And only one of those has to be made true. So it only has to, I mean, you still have some sort of isomorphic structure relation there, right?
There's an isomorphism, if that's even the right word. I'm not sure that it is, but yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, it is. There's an isomorphism between the first disjunct of the disjunction and the truth maker of the disjunction, but that's
Right.
not an isomorphism between the whole proposition and the truth maker of that proposition.
No, but I think that's the common view in truth-making theories is that the one disjunct having a truth maker is enough for the disjunction to be true, right?
Yes, right. But the point here is to deny his reasons for taking facts to be just true propositions, to the extent that they aren't exactly the same. And this is an example of there not being exactly the same. Then we might conclude that there is something more to facts, or rather the truth makers, other than merely being true propositions.
My point is that people who
Uh,
defend truth-making theories are still going to embrace an isomorphic relationship between the truth maker and the truth bearer. So you're still going to have to accept some sort of isomorphism.
Yes, but it won't be perfect. And insofar as they're not perfect, facts would not just be true propositions.
Isn't it complicated to figure out what the structure of a proposition would be if all propositions, he says, are states of affairs, right? That's the third thing he claims, that there's all the
Yeah, well,
conceivable
let's just go
states
there.
of
Yeah.
affairs, and the possible ones are propositions, and the other ones are, the actual ones are facts. So they presumably have really complicated, like the structure that comes across in natural languages are not the structure of the proposition, right? The structure. So if this is a fact, and imagine the platypus on there instead is a proposition, then how do we decide how many parts that has? How do we decide what the structure of this proposition is? Meet your proposition.
Yeah, it's not simple. Yeah.
It's a tough one.
But the question is just whether facts are true propositions, not whether this is easy. And then the fourth one is
no, the third one. No. What about the third one?
But that's what we're discussing, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Facts are just states of affairs that obtain. That's kind of the target here, right?
Right. So there might be sort of a general, if you have your possible worlds, and you can kind of think of propositions as chunks of them. And if that chunk happens to be in the actual world, you got yourself a fact there.
Right.
But let's imagine we go to a different possible world right now. Right. But no, we're back to the actual world. So we got a fact, not a proposition.
I need the Wayne's World to
Counterpart me says, back to reality.
Oh my god.
I mean, I guess people do think that propositions are world chunks, right? Or sets of worlds, or so maybe this isn't the craziest stuff ever, but I don't know. I think I'm more drawn to thinking of them as some sort of abstract object.
The fourth one, I think, is the strongest reason, which is, of course, what motivates Armstrong to work so hard.
Right.
he says, what about, no, let me just read it out loud. No compelling motive can be found for expanding our ontology by distinguishing facts from propositions. Arguably, we need to countenance propositions as the objects of belief, assertions, and so on. But why add facts in addition? No, this isn't what I was talking about.
Oh, it isn't?
Yeah. No. I thought he was going to talk about how things get complicated with complicated propositions, but this is just a parsimony. But parsimony is admissible only when you really have nothing to add with an additional category. But that's only.
This is a motivation for Armstrong because he doesn't embrace facts, but some sort of like state of affairs or states of affairs. He has like his own. But the idea is that a state of affairs is sort of indeterminate.
Look, it says, but distinguishing facts or actual states of affairs. He doesn't even want to distinguish actual states of affairs from propositions. Armstrong definitely does.
No, he definitely does, yeah. But he's not assuming this isomorphism. It's the state of affairs can make, maybe an infinite number of propositions true. So there's no sharing of structure there. That seems to be presumed here, is that there needs to be this preservation of structure on both sides. That's the difference. And that is what motivates Armstrong to not embrace facts, but to embrace states of affairs.
Well, but it is what compels Armstrong to expand his ontology beyond propositions.
Beyond propositions, yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, so I'm not really clear, but I know there's some confusion on what Armstrong really means by states of affairs. So I don't know at this point, because it's something that I really want to get to the bottom of, but apparently he's been a little bit cagey about that like exact point in his work. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
I think it's just, it's just the truth makers, and then it's gonna get complicated for every one of the different kinds of propositions. And then when he finishes his theory, that is, once he's covered all the different kinds of propositions, he'll say state of affairs is just, the truth maker as corresponds to each of the different types of propositions. I don't know that.
But that's exactly what he's not going to say. It's not going to be a different kind of truth maker. The truth making relation will be the same, and the truth maker will always be whatever he thinks are the states of affairs.
Yeah. No, you're right. It's one kind for all of them. That's right.
Right.
But
that's right.
But a kind of different account for each one, as motivated by the differences in the structures of the propositions. But yeah, ultimately it's got to be unified. So yeah, I guess he has to say something about what states of affairs are ontologically without relation to independently of the truth-making relation. But I think he just leaves that for last because the focus is on the truth-making relation and whatever makes that work.
Yeah, and also it might be good to keep in mind that he doesn't end this paper proposing that he's knocked down truth making. Like he says, it might be possible. Like these are just the concerns and the issues, right? So, that's fair. And so someone like Armstrong believes they've accounted for all of these issues, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what do you make of the Russell Frege thing? That's worth reading out loud. The fundamental distinction alluded to here, that is between propositions and facts, is between Fregean propositions and Russellian propositions. On the one hand, we can deploy identity conditions according to which the sentences express the same proposition as one another, just in case they have the same sense. Propositions identified in this Fregean way are the objects of de dicto belief. Alternatively, and with equal legitimacy, we can deploy Russellian identity conditions according to which two sentences express the same proposition, just in case one may be transformed to the other by substitution of coreferential terms. Such propositions are the objects of de re belief. And then the Fregean facts are the Fregean propositions, and the Russellian facts are the true Russellian propositions. So facts are just true propositions, and the differences are due to these different ways of conceiving of propositions, which are just about identity conditions.
Right, and are about whether it's de re or de dicto belief.
Right, that's the key.
Right. So there's obviously a huge conversation here, independently of truth maker theory.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't want to do truth makers originally. I wanted to do the metaphysics of propositions, but then I decided it would be better to do truth making. So here we're coming full circle, right? And I think what I'm drawn to is the following interpretation of what's going on here. we are drawn to Russellian propositions to the extent that we don't want to go full on modal. And we're drawn to the Fregean propositions to the extent that we want to account for all the different puzzles that turn up in individuation. And the tension is between wanting to do one without doing the other. That is, wanting to have the solution without going modal.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
I just say this with ease because I'm ready with the Lewis whenever you guys are ready.
Yeah, reading this probably would have been easier if I hadn't just read Davidson on this whole history. And I was like, wait, is this the early Russell or the late Russell? By great propositions, do we mean like the constituents of the propositions just are the entities in the world? Or do we mean that it's the later Russell where it's like the proposition just is a relation between the person and the world?
That's a very good question. My guess is this is early, but I have no clue.
Yeah, because it sounds like
Yeah.
early, yeah.
That was my guess too. And actually, I'm not really sure what the late one is other than that he dropped the first one, he worked on it a little bit and then moved on.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar enough with Russell's work.
Yeah, I think the early one's the one that most people are talking about usually.
Yeah.
Is that so? Okay, interesting.
There's an interesting fact where, about many great
interesting
philosophers in the modern age is
An interesting true proposition.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah, if you can believe. Yeah. That many famous academic philosophers kind of like get famous on a few like early articles, and they have like 40 more years of publication, but everybody is still just reading the first like four big papers.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Quine didn't stop publishing until like the late 90s or something, right? But I mean,
Yeah.
what's
Yes.
right after 1967? I don't know.
Yeah.
Of his
And
later
Russell,
stuff.
Russell wrote through the 50s, I think. So, it's like, yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
understand. What does anti-nuke activism have to do with anything?
No, I mean, he was publishing, philosophy even.
He gave
Some
up
of
on
his books,
philosophy
some of his
halfway
books are published in the 40s. Some of his philosophy
Oh no,
books.
that's still good. Yeah, that's still good.
Yeah,
But you're right. I mean,
Well,
this happens to a lot of people, even the best. Even
it
the best.
does. Even the greatest.
what does that mean? Is it,
Carnap kept evolving his views through the 50s.
is it that the conversation outpaces them on their views? The conversation moves on, or
I don't.
are they getting into weeds into their own theories and things? And like, what is it?
I mean, I suppose it's both in the sense that like there's still only one person, and and the conversation is this gigantic collective, enterprise that's beyond one person.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
It was funny. I was watching that Davidson Quine interview. I think we've posted in Slack multiple times. It just got posted in Telegram, and it's funny because Davidson is, he's such a huge fan of Quine. It's like painful to watch, like how he's like in awe of Quine. But he's like, I just read your latest article about whatever it was, and this is like a 99 or something, right? I was like, wait, what? Or I'm not sure when the interview
Yeah.
was. It was like the late 90s. I'm like, wait, he published something in the late 90s?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I remember hanging out with some academics in the late 90s. It's just a few years before Quine died. And some people were saying, Quine would roll over in his grave if he were in his grave yet. In reference to something somebody said about his work.
Oh, man.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's pretty good.
It's very good.
Okay, so what might be salvaged from truth maker theory?
Oh, did we finish this section then on the Russellian, Fregean?
Wait, no. So the Russellian, yeah.
No.
So the issue is. So you think the issue really has to do with modality?
Oh, well, I'm not really answering Horwich here. I'm just trying to paint a picture for how we can be drawn to these ideas, how Horwich might have been drawn to these ideas, but it's not meant to be very directly critical of what I'm reading here. And in order to address what he's saying here, I think we would have to go to the next paragraph where he says, does the truth maker theorist get all he needs with this distinction? Can his view not be that Frege propositions are made true by Russellian facts? So if we take Russellian propositions to be in one-to-one correspondence with the available truth makers, then you can interpret what he's asking here is whether Fregean propositions might not have those Russellian truth makers be what we want. But even if, and I think that's not entirely wrong, especially if we take Russellian propositions to not merely be distinct from the Fregean propositions by their more coarse-grained individuation conditions, but by having the singular terms be literally the objects, right? Which is how he liked to put it in atomism. But the problem is that those aren't good propositions. And so you'd have all the same problems we've had before.
Does this mean that propositions are always their own truth maker?
Well, that's why Russell gave up on it, because that would be
Right.
absurd for the false propositions.
Well, then you have to have possible worlds or something.
Which is why I brought up modality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, because if this is a proposition, then it can make itself true.
Right. That's what the early Russell dealt with. Yeah.
Mhm.
But more the false propositions would not exist, or they'd be meaningless, is really the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
I think-
yeah, or like there'd be no proposition expressed or something like that.
Just
Yeah.
wouldn't be whatever
Yeah.
whatever it is to be a proposition. Yeah.
But this is not how he intends us to think about Russellian propositions. He intends us to think of them as yet another way of understanding abstractions from sentences, which is how we can then understand the last paragraph. Thus, insofar as truth maker theory aims to get to the metaphysical rock bottom of what is true, it is doomed to failure, for the real foundation is expressed by sentences rather than nominals.
So when he says nominals, he means names.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure. I thought he just meant something like whatever is named the referent or something, in the way that Russell had his propositions being, but I wasn't sure.
Let's just read on the footnote. Why are we prone to confusion on this point? Yeah, good question. The answer, presumably, is that a natural way of specifying what is fundamental is by saying something of the form ... are the basic elements of reality. But that sort of claim forces us to supply a subject that will refer to a kind of thing, or
Right.
to various kinds of things. The slot must be filled with an expression of the form such and such entities. A list of sentences, those that we take to articulate our most basic commitments, will not do. So we end up with nominalizations of those sentences, referring to facts, states, events, etc. This result is innocuous if it is taken as it would ordinarily be taken in non-philosophical contexts, as nothing more than a loose way of affirming those sentences, a useful approximation to what strictly speaking should be said. The trouble arises when that convenient inaccuracy is not recognized as such, so we wrongly infer that such and such, that quote, such and such facts, states, etc. exist, unquote, is the correct form of the most fundamental characterizations of reality. All right, Karen, Kenny.
This seems very related to like that concern that Frege had about, like about referring to concepts as objects, and
Yeah.
but paralleled for the proposition and then sentences or whatever, referring to the proposition as object as opposed to merely expressing it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I didn't understand that concern as much either. But I think it is the same concern. Yeah. Do we have to read Kit Fine's question of realism?
It's one of the, it's, yeah, I mean, I would definitely like to read it at some point. I think that's one of the, it's one of like the 3 or 4 really influential grounding papers.
Did we read it already?
No, we read another one. If he has like 2 or 3 that are
Okay.
important, and we read the other one.
The essence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it essence and modality or something? I don't
Yeah, that's it.
remember.
That's it.
Yeah.
Basically, how is essence not quite the same thing as necessity?
Yeah.
I just read the question of realism for the Monday night group, and it was
Oh, really?
tortuous. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I
the
guess
paper
it's
or the group?
the paper. Our discussion was a little tortured too because of trying to get the
Which group is this?
the San Jose group.
Oh, Philip. Wow.
I mean, basically, he just champions the usefulness of the notion of grounding as a way of understanding debates between realists and anti-realists, which is interesting enough. But yeah, some of his arguments against using bivalence or reduction, various sorts of reductions were just a little bit difficult to slog through.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that it might be relevant to this stuff.
Okay. So the last section is pretty easy reading. He basically just says that Armstrong is motivated because he thinks that a decent theory of correspondence will help us with broader philosophical problems, to which 2 examples are given: how to argue against the phenomenalist and how to argue against the behaviorist. And Horwich says that we can do this without truth makers. It's not really adding anything. I have difficulty following this exactly because, in all honesty, I've lost sight of why I care about truth makers. All I know is that I'm definitely sure I do, because because it keeps coming up. It's like I'm always having to say, well, if we just had a decent theory of correspondence. So I figure I'll realize this as I do a second and a third pass. But right now, I'm not immediately seeing how it's not merely interesting in its own right, which of course is always an option, but for something this deep, it's almost always because it answers some other question, which we have prior interest in. And it's not obvious to me that it was really about how to answer the phenomenalist. Like
No. I think this is just what Armstrong gives as examples of motivating for adopting a truth-making theory. That's all. And he's just saying
that's fine. That's great. But
Yeah.
that might be what motivates him and not what motivates me. Like, I'm not sure that Armstrong and I are that close. I'm just happy he's working on it. But I might be closer to Restall and Lewis, right? Or
Right.
I don't know. Because Armstrong wants a moderate course between nominalism and realism. And I don't have that issue. My issue is more about truth itself. It's about grounding objectivity and semantics. So
Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
there was since Brandon's becoming the new voter in this group in terms of
that would be a bad move.
Does that mean we need to start drinking again when we refer to Brandon Moore photo?
So this is where we kind of get somewhat of a punchline, though it was kind of muted.
Are you saying we're going to read 4 books by Brandon?
No.
I do feel like we need to go to the non-summary of his position, right? Because articulated reasons, I'm getting kind of annoyed by the lack of argumentation. But at the same time, I don't know if I want to commit to his masterpiece or his first masterpiece.
His first one, I think he's done 2, and I think he's probably going to have a 3rd before he dies.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, I would be open
The
not
guy-
like
the
right
guy
away,
is,
not this year necessarily, but I am open to reading Making It Explicit and the Hegel book, if only because I'm desperate to know how to
sure.
talk about Hegel. I mean, he just comes up all
Yeah.
the time in this world.
The Hegel book, I'm super interested in. Hegel comes up in almost every conversation.
Yeah,
It's,
but I refuse to read the Hegel book without reading Making It Explicit first.
oh,
Because
really?
I
Well-
just think he's very cumulative in his work, and I just think it's not going to work. I mean,
I think he recapitulates a lot of it.
Yeah.
Well, I think he recapitulates a lot of it, and it's because I have a theory about Brandon.
So that's your theory about Brandon.
My theory about Brandon is that when he was young, he read some of these great canonical philosophers, and that a lot of his career really has just been him translating what he believes Hegel said into analytic philosophy speak.
Yeah.
So I think much of what he wrote in making it explicit, and in many of his papers, is him hashing out in terms we can understand today, post Quine and Sellers and so on, what he thinks was already there for the most part. So I think that his work is cumulative, but I also think it's all sort of like the same thing.
So he has a bunch of lectures where I think the title is something like From Empiricism to Hegel and Back Again or something like that. And he tries to relate all of it together. I think that's exactly his like grand project is that. Hegel was like right on, and so somehow bring it back into the fold and integrate it all together. And my thought was to read the Hegel book might actually kind of elucidate his thoughts going back to his other work.
Okay, maybe we start with the Hegel one. I mean, whatever. I think, okay, I'm open to that. Yeah, why don't we just start
I
with the
just like
Hegel
all
one?
he's ever wanted to talk about is Hegel. So why don't we just go right there? To where
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm persuaded. I was only worried that he might not sufficiently recapitulate his ideas. But if Kenny, you have a bias wherever it comes from that he's constantly recapitulating, then I'm willing to go for that bias and just read the Hegel directly. We can always back out and go back to the other one.
Yeah.
Because you know what I'm really tired of is what so-and-so really meant was, whether it's Kant or Hume or whatever, and then like 4 other accounts of false interpretations, and
Right.
then they use their interpretation to promote their own position. I'm
Right.
tired of it.
Yeah,
Let's just go right
that's
to what you think Hegel
but-
said.
exactly.
Well,
right.
but the thing is that though, Josh, that line will just lead you to actually reading Hegel. And
That's true. Yeah.
I don't
No,
know if you want to commit to that.
No, that's perfectly true. And Brandon's Hegel will not be Hegel, but the difference is that he'll be accessible. You
Yeah.
know, like the chance
I mean,
of
the only other
understanding him is
person-
like 90%, whereas Hegel is like 20.
Right. Yeah. No, it's true. It's pretty
Mhm.
stuff.
I feel like committing to reading Hegel is committing to writing the book on what Hegel actually meant, right? Because once
And
you really
Brandon did that.
understand what he was saying, you're committing yourself to writing about what he actually said. You have to. Because you're going to read it and you're going to go, oh, I get what he's saying.
Yeah.
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 But I brought up Brandon because this part at the end of section 6, he says, there would appear to be a worthwhile project of elucidating the concept by articulating our practices of explanation giving and of drawing conclusions about how facts of various logical types are engendered and about which of them might be fundamental. Such conclusions would provide the core of truth within the truth maker theory. So there seems to be the sense of when we're talking about truth, we're talking about what we have justification to affirm, right? Based on what we know about the world, right? We're epistemicizing truth again. So what makes it true that Mars is red? Whatever the story is that we can tell about oxidation or the iron content, whatever that is, that's what gives us the justification to give this explanation story about Mars being red. And that's sort of what motivates all this truth talk. And that's not what I'm interested in. That's not what Karen's interested in. Right?
Oh, that's a great point. So Karen's objection is really an objection to the epistemicizing of truth maker accounts.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
I love it. No, that makes a lot
Well,
of
though
sense. I know you didn't mean it that way, but I think it works in that direction.
But I do think it is, truth making is it could be thought about as exploring assertion, right? And the conditions under which assertion is appropriate. But I don't think it's the history of those conditions. It's the conditions themselves. Right.
Yeah, right. No, I agree with that.
Mm.
By the way, your point about if you commit to Hegel, you're committed to writing a book about how to read Hegel. It reminded me of the beginning of Horwich's book on Wittgenstein. Let me read you the preface. He says, the first paragraph, or the first few lines, he says, arguably Wittgenstein's singular achievement And by the way, this is the book that motivated that YouTube discussion. So
Oh, okay.
arguably, Wittgenstein's singular achievement was to have appreciated the true nature of philosophy. And arguably, this insight gives his work on specific philosophical topics a power of illumination and demystification that cannot be found anywhere else. It is because I am myself attracted to this particular radical perspective on the subject, and because I think that it's so often misunderstood and undervalued, that I have written this essay. Of course, I am uncomfortably aware that there are already too many books on Wittgenstein, most of them composed in the same presumptuous spirit as this one, their authors imagining that they are peculiarly able to discern what is vital in his work as to present it. What can I say, except that I hope the reader will find here an interpretation that is distinctive and compelling.
At least
Oh
he's
my
so aware.
God. Wow.
Like a fan letter where they're like, I realize you get a lot of fan letter, a lot of fan mail, but I hope mine stands out.
I really did love your concert.
I really do love your third
did.
album.
Sorry. Oh my gosh. The other reason why I say the thing about Brandom and Hegel is because I've definitely read somewhere, like in an interview with him, that I think he spent at least 20 years writing that book. So like,
Yeah.
I see.
so I take that, to be a sign that like chances are half the papers he published in that period of time were like
They're just
him
drafts
working
of the
at
book. Yeah.
yeah
Yeah.
him working
makes
out the
sense.
ideas.
All right. Do we want to say anything about the conclusions that 1 through 6? I really appreciate his numbering them.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that.
I mean, we've gone through these though.
To the extent that we have, we can skip, but is there anything that we missed that might be on this list? I don't think so, although it is a very nicely articulated summation.
Yeah, I mean, just 4 is the kind of sticking point for me, where I think he makes an error, but suggests a possible solution. It's the whole causal explanation thing.
Oh, let's read it. You want to read it since you picked it up?
Yeah. So, thus claims about which kinds of entity, if any, serve as truth makers, boil down to these. Boil down to the thesis about which essential theses are explanatorily fundamental. But it turns out on reflection that fundamental explanatory premises never take the form, all right, what is this? There exists an X such that X equals the fact that K is F, or there exists an X such that X is the state of affairs of K being F, or there exists an X such that X is the Fness of K. For such entities exist because K is F. Therefore, the truth of the proposition K is F, that K is F, is not fundamentally explained by the existence of a fact or state or event, etc. Rather, it is true because K is F. And this is the whole, there are some conditions that make something the case, is what then in turn makes some fact or some proposition or whatever your truth-making theory is the case. But as I feel like we've just hammered home, this doesn't seem to be.
Oh, you know what? I just realized something. This is all an articulation of Wittgenstein's "The world is the totality of what is the case," because that is the opposite of number 5.
That's number 5. Yeah.
Yeah. He says it's a
Yeah.
fallacy to presuppose that being is basic, or in other words, that the world is the totality of things captured by means of singular terms rather than sentences. What is the alternative? What is captured by sentences? What is the case? The totality of what is the case.
Yeah.
He's being the Tractarian, basically.
Is that a phrase? Tractarian? Like
Tractarian? Yeah.
Well, Wittgenstein's first book, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. So yeah, I don't know. I think I've heard it before. Obviously, it's a stupid word, right? Because it just means treatise, which means essay.
Yeah.
So he's an Assarian. Even essay is not English, right? Essay is just French for try. So he's a trier.
He's a trier. That's funny.
She's certainly trying times.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
At least he's not
Yeah,
a
no,
trial
but
lawyer.
what did you not like about 4? Or was it
The idea that there's some entity and it comes after whatever causes the thing in question, right? So the state of affairs or Mars being red is caused by these like some sort of cover law explanation, and that's
well,
going
he's
to
not he's being cagey. He doesn't say it's caused by.
he says because it's causal. I mean, he grants that it's
No,
causal.
it's well, he also brings up constitutive explanations.
Yes,
And how else
but-
are you supposed to express them except by becauses?
right, but the constitutive explanation account is what he endorses. The causal one he doesn't, right? So these
Yeah,
ent-
but yeah, what I'm saying is I'm not sure that he is. I hear what you're saying. If I had been a reviewer of this paper, it might have been worth clarifying if every time he uses the word because he means causal, or if he merely means to evoke explanation, in which case it's ambiguous systematically between causal and constitutive explanation.
That's fair, but he's referencing section 4 where he brings in the causal laws that make it the case that Mars is red. So I don't think it's ambiguous in this case.
All right.
So he says because of this, where's the good line? Because of. Right, so he says K is F because of X, and this is where he introduces the whole like laws and initial conditions. He introduces the asymmetry, which is the causal asymmetry, and I think up to this point it's only So K is made F by X equals K is F because of X, which he then leads to the deduction that X exists. Is the explanatory deduction from X exists to X is F. So you need the causal account to the making Mars red to establish the fact or whatever it is, or I'm sorry, the state of affairs that you can then deduce to the explanatory deduction comes in after that. So the causal because comes first, as I read this. I could be wrong, but I don't know what. Yeah,
No. The causal one is when you go from the laws to
Yes.
P, whatever the P is.
That's right.
But then he wants to say that the fact exists or the state of affairs exists or whatever because of P. And so that second because, I think it's not clear whether it's supposed to be constitutive or not.
The second because should be constitutive. The first should be causal.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
The
But
first
this
causal
is
gives you.
but this is the second when he says for such entities exist because K is F. That one is the second because.
No. Such entities exist because causal. The link between the existence and the proposition that it makes true, that's explanatory, right?
I thought that one was constitutive, although I did say causal earlier. I really don't care. I think it could be either.
Well, constitutively explanatory.
It says for such
yes.
entities, that's like the facts. For such entities like facts exist because K is F. That I think that's like when you go from P to the fact that P exists.
Oh, I thought you go.
No,
The fact is of P's existence is because of the causal because, but going from
no, it's the
P is explanatory.
it's the existence of a fact, right? He says such entities like facts exist because. I mean, it's the fact that K is F. So he's saying, in other words, he's saying the fact that K exists. Sorry, he's saying the fact that K is F exists because K is F.
Oh, so the second one is causal. The first one is constitutive.
I'm not sure what you're referring to as first and second now.
So the last sentence in 4, therefore the truth of the proposition K is F is not fundamentally explained.
Oh,
by the existence of a fact. So the existence of a fact doesn't explain K is F, but then the last sentence, rather, it is true because K is F.
Okay.
It is
Yeah.
true is constitutively explanatory because K is F is causally explanatory, right? Is that the idea? Because his first step is explaining why K is F, and that's where he brings in the laws and initial conditions.
Yeah, right. So in that earlier section, whatever it was for, there were two parallel deductions, right?
Right.
And within each deduction, really it was really two deductions per
I
deductive
thought
line.
both parallel
Right.
deductions were explanatory or constitutively explanatory. Both were.
I thought so too.
Well, I suppose it probably depends on what the laws are.
So
For
the
the
laws
fir-
and
for the-
initial
for the- for the
conditions.
first.
So my
Yeah.
reading was that the laws and initial conditions causally explain P, and then from P you get.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, and then
Yeah, exactly. And then P, you constitutively get both of the.
exactly, exactly.
branches.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I thought that's what he was laying out here in 4, an overview of that. No?
I think he's just talking about what comes at the branching part.
Oh, you think it's just the branching part here? Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Quantum proof. Then there seems to be a gap in the overview.
Well, I mean, he's just.
So
I mean,
five being the fallacy to presuppose that either is
Yeah.
basic, right? So the fact can't be more basic than the proposition in the way that he presented it here. So we're already talking about constitutive explanation. If 4 is also focused on constitutive explanation, then that places the emphasis on 3. I better seen as deploying an independent grasp concept, but this is about the intuitive concept of truth. We should appreciate the basic content of the truth maker theory and formula. Yeah, I don't know. I think 4 has to run them both together. P because of X, P exists. Yeah, 3 is just sort of his deflationary introduction.
The heart of it is 4, for sure.
Part of it has to be 4. Yeah, it has to be. Otherwise, he just left it out, which that wouldn't be a good overview.
4 is just the upshot of the four section, right? I mean.
Well, these are his objections.
Yeah, no, and his explanation of the objection is the full story, but the objection in itself is just that the order of explanation is backwards than the truth maker theorist wants it to be,
So his
according to him.
His objection is the conclusion to the argument that he presented in section 4. So it's just the
Right. Yeah.
Okay, that could be right.
Yeah. The objection is that facts come after P.
Right.
rather
Okay,
than-
you're right, because he says
Yeah.
it's a question about which existential thesis are explanatorily
Fundamental.
fundamental, right? So that is
Yeah.
the objection. Okay, that's fair. You're right. You're right. Okay.
All right, shall we adjourn?
Sure, yes. What are we reading next time?
Oh,
I,
that's a good question.
I recommend we do a little interlude and comment on this.
Oh,
being
interesting.
willing, yeah. Maybe we can read something from his book, something short, but let the focus be on the video.
From which book?
The Metaphilosophy of Wittgenstein by Horwich.
Oh,
So it would be a metaphilosophical interlude.
does it have does it have an introduction? That's
Well, let me look right now. Let me see.
Next week is one of the Wednesdays that I have to miss.
Oh no!
No.
All right, let
We
me
do
just-
another day?
We could do Tuesdays or yeah, Tuesday would be easy.
sure.
Or earlier on Wednesday.
Okay.
All right,
I'm-
let me just stop it here. Let me just stop it.
I'm gonna